Hi, I'm Don. Today we paint another Clay Cyanide miniature. In today's video, I'll tell you why I do not like Slapchop and I'll show you how I do heavy speed painting. By heavy speed painting, I mean we'll do multiple layers of speed paints, we'll be heavy on the speed paints and the washes. Multiple layers of speed paints or other transparent paints is really fun and will produce really good depth. However, this can be tricky if you overdo it, and I'll tell you why. Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to my channel. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. And of course, special thanks to the Army Painter for making this video possible. Now, this will be the last video for which has a shameless plug of our Kickstarter. Our Kickstarter is ending in a few hours after the launch or release of this video. The focus of our Kickstarter is to teach you how to do miniature painting, especially on 75mm and 120mm figures. Now back to our heavy speed painting. Now, don't get me wrong, Slapchop is great, especially if you don't have an airbrush or you don't want to use spray cans. The zenithal of this miniature was painted with spray cans, and it's a matter of just priming it black and then gray and then eventually white primer from the top. So unlike Slapchop, a quick zenithal with spray cans is so much faster, especially if you're priming in batches. Lastly, Slapchop doesn't produce a good, nice foundation for skin, and skin is my fab part to paint, so no to Slapchop for me. Now in this video, the idea is to do heavy, really heavy speed painting. I have been a watercolor artist since I was 12 years old. And I use it to have good grades. I give my teachers portraits of themselves in watercolor. So, kidding aside, if you check out my older videos, I used to do painting with inks because I used to just paint with Vallejo before and they only have inks way back. And so I use inks and painted over zenithal. And I enjoy it so much until I discovered speed paints. Now, another reason for me for not doing slop chop is that speed paints and, of course, to some extent, contrast paints, these colors, these kinds of paints produce nice contrast even if you don't do slop chop. In fact, you'll produce more vibrant finishes if you paint these paints over zenithal. And of course, because the speed paints and even to some extent the contrast paints, they produce nice contrast even on just white primer, you don't even need to do zenithal to produce good results. But I do prefer zenithal because it kind of shows me where the highlights or generic highlights would fall on the miniature. You see in the video right now, we're just painting the base colors with speed paints. So we're just kind of sketching or guessing what colors to use on the miniature so that it will look good after we're done. Do not fret on what colors to use or it's advisable that you plan your colors, of course, but if you're in the middle of painting the miniature already and you pre-planned your colors, it's a matter of just don't be very conscious on what colors you're using on specific parts of the miniature, because you could always reset this by painting it black or certain parts and then repainting white if you want, if you still want to use speed paints. Or you could simply use normal acrylics and paint over the speed paints if you want to change the colors. It's not obvious in the video, and I think it's kind of difficult to make sure that it's obvious in the video. I apply speed paints like a specific color twice on a miniature. The first pass of speed paint is usually applied all over the miniature, and then the second pass, after letting the first pass dry, The second pass is applied mostly on the shade areas of the miniature. In this manner, I create a little bit more volume than just one pass of speed paints. Make sure if you apply a couple of passes of the same color that you let the previous layer dry, and of course the second layer or the second pass, you blend the edges so that you don't produce coffee stains. Speed paints is a true one coat solution in a way, but much like any paint, a couple of thin passes will always produce better finishes and better results. Now, if you apply thin coats or thin speed paints, you could use the hair dryer, but let it like the speed paints settle for maybe 5 minutes and then let it settle on the crevices and do its thing before you use the hair dryer. Now you see in the video we're applying fire drake to add a bit more saturation to the miniature. After applying this initial base colors with speed paints, I let the miniature dry for roughly 30 minutes and then use the hair dryer and then let it dry again for another 30 minutes, so practically an hour, and then resume painting. You don't really have to let it cure for an hour, but I'm a sucker for curing. I really like the peace of mind that I have very durable painting even during the painting process. Now we go heavy with the speed paints and the washes. The idea here is to make the miniature darker, has more depth and more contrast so that once we paint the highlights, we will have very good depth already, and it's just a matter of picking the highlight area so that it pops a bit more. Also, you'll notice in the video, I'm kind of tweaking the colors already, adding a bit more color so that I have a more balanced look to my painting. Also, to add a simple, like, a quick trick is to add more shades to some areas like purples and even dark blues so that you have more color depth. Always be conscious that as you apply like speed paints and washes in small areas, you have to blend the edges or else you'll produce coffee stains. Or make sure that you go back to those areas and paint highlights on top of them so that you don't see those ugly coffee stains. In fine scale modeling, this part of the painting process is sometimes called, I think, filtering, and most people use oils. It's a matter of just adding more tints to certain areas so that you create more color depth and you have more interest to your painting. Also, in this part of the painting, you create more contrast by layering tons and tons of washes and speed paints, especially if you apply them on certain areas only. Going heavy on speed paints is super fun, especially if you use like bright colors on top of darker colors or vice versa. You could see the effect and you could see your color depth popping, and it's really, really satisfying to look at. However, it's important to note that if you apply too much or you use too many colors, you might end up with a muddy finish. A muddy grayish brown finish on some areas is fine, especially if those are the shade areas. But then again, if you apply too much on areas like the highlight areas that you don't plan to be too dark, just make sure you apply a quick pass of highlighting so that you kind of fix the heavy speed painting. If you have an airbrush, you may also use an airbrush to do filtering and add more shades or even like a yellowish tint from the top so that it kind of like shows you the sunlight and it will look really nice and warm. And then you could use some purples and violets again with the airbrush and paint it over the darker areas or darker side of the miniature. However, if you use an airbrush, it doesn't produce the same contrast as with if you use a brush. So keep that in mind, but it's a really nice option, especially if you really plan to do a lot of highlighting later. Again, you may use speed paint medium or even wash medium to add transparency to the paints, especially if you're filtering over the whole miniature. so that you don't overdo it too fast, and you will have like nice subtle effects on the miniature if you add transparencies to the paints. In terms of the actual process of using the airbrush, I recommend that you use the airbrush to filter first, and then once that is dry, you use the brush to add more contrast so that it kind of like blends down the airbrushing, because the airbrushing is a little bit too flat even if you add mediums. Now you can call this done. This is all just speed paints and washes, but of course we'll do a bit of highlighting. Like I said in my previous video, you could paint with just speed paints and of course a little bit of washes, and you'll produce great effects. The most important part here that is not too obvious is to learn your speed paints. Some speed paints, like they stain really well on the surface, on the raised areas. Some are really good at adding more contrast and tend to settle more on the crevices and details of the miniature. And some are very, very saturated, and adding a little bit of medium will help in controlling those colors. Usually, the darker colors are very saturated. The pastel colors can give you nice tinting on the model. And of course, the lighter colors, you need to apply in a couple of passes to really produce nice coverage. Now, since we went heavy on the speed paints and the washes, it's just a matter of highlighting certain areas so that we make the miniature pop a little bit more. Now, before our final thoughts, I would like to thank all of you guys, my viewers. The channel is growing, and of course, my patrons. And special thanks to Army Painter for making this video possible. Now, here is the finished model. As you can see, I went a little bit lazy on the painting of the scales and the fur on the back of the troll. Speed paints or similar like paints like contrast paints, they render really well on highly detailed areas or surfaces like the scales and the fur. So I was a bit lazy and did not like do highlighting on those parts already, and I think it still gave me a fairly good result. Most of the highlighting work on this miniature was done on the skin and of course the non-metallic metal. I did apply some rust washes, rust colored washes, and rust effects on certain areas of the armor, but I don't want the armor to look too warm because the skin of the lizard or the dragon is too warm already. So I did not want to make the armor look like very warm too. I want a contrast in between the armor parts and of course the warm parts of the miniature. I do have another Clay Cyanide miniature without the dragon. With that miniature, I think I'll put more rust on the weapons so that it kind of contrasts like the bluish skin of the troll. I also had fun highlighting the red hair. It made the head of this troll pop a bit more. Also, I did a bit more highlighting on the beige parts, like the bandage looking details of the miniature. And then lastly, I did a lot of highlighting on the base so that the details of the base, the rock, will pop more. And I really enjoyed painting that because the sculpt of the base looks really good. So although admittedly the highlighting made the miniature pop a bit more, but if you don't really want to spend more time on highlighting your miniature, as you could see previously, that you could pull off a good painting just by going heavy with the speed paints and the fanatic washes. I think I have to do heavy speed painting again on a simpler model because this one is a little bit too complex and it's kind of like difficult to follow the progression of the painting. So I'll do heavy speed painting and heavy washes on another miniature, but a simpler one. But I do hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I have a ton of speed painting videos. I do have a playlist already, and you just have to click the playlist if you want to watch them all. That's it, Pansit. I hope you like this video. Do like, subscribe, and all that stuff because it helps the channel a lot. And until my next video, guys. Bye! If you like this video, you might like this other speed painting videos.